Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome on this wintry morning. Feels like it's still fall, but feels like winter this morning. And I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving and had too much to eat and good time with your families and so forth. We did as well. I had to get up at 4:30 this morning to drop off one of my sons at the airport. So if I'm not as sharp as I normally am, that's my excuse. But anyway, I'm glad everyone's here this morning. Let's begin with a prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you so much for the opportunity we have to gather here together, to worship together, study from your word, pray to you, sing praises to you. We're thankful that for this time we have in your design, the church. You know that we need encouragement, we need edification, we need support, we need to be challenged, and you created us as social beings. So we're thankful for the church that gives us the opportunity to get closer to other Christians and to get closer to you and to live in accordance with your desires. Pray that in all things we remember that your Son, the sacrifice that he made, that perfect sacrifice, what it means for us. And we pray this in his holy name. Amen. All right. Last week we taught, we're in Acts 17. And last week we covered Paul's, I don't know if we could call it a sermon or a speech at the Acropolis in Athens. And we covered that with his kind of the context of that sermon. And we contrasted that with the sermons that we've seen earlier in Acts, where he's talking, and Peter's sermons earlier, where they're talking to a Jewish audience and they're referencing prophecy and Abraham and King David and the Messiah. But that's not what's in this message. This message is one of introducing people that have no exposure to Yahweh God, introducing them to an all-powerful God who created us all, and that we must that our salvation is through this God and through his Son, who came to this earth and was crucified and was resurrected. And so that's essentially, in a nutshell, what the speech was, or the sermon. And then in verse 32, we didn't get here. We're starting in verse 32. Now, when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius and Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So what they had was the reaction, which I kind of mentioned last week, which kind of, it tickled me a little bit, because his message is talking about the God that created the earth, that created everything, including us, and he's talking about that God to them. And the part they find incredible is the fact that there was a resurrection from the dead. It's one thing if you disagree with the message in entirety, but this is to just kind of cherry pick and say, okay, we're with you up until, we're with you on this all-powerful God that we're now becoming aware of, but I don't know about this resurrection piece. But what about that all-powerful God part that Paul was just talking about? So that was interesting. what kind of reaction, based on what the scripture says, what kind of reaction does he get from his time in Athens and more in general, and more specifically, this message that he delivers on Mars Hill? Mixed. Fair to say, mixed. Some thought this is a crazy man. This is crazy man talking about crazy fables, and about raising from the dead, and don't really have just lost him at that point. Some that say, "We'll hear you more." So they weren't necessarily buying what he was selling. They didn't accept the message at that point, but they were, their interest was piqued, and they were willing to hear more. And there were some that were converted. So it's very interesting. I think it's interesting, and I've said this the last 2 weeks, so I'll just say it one more time. That the encouragement for us is as we go about our lives and as we interact with others, that our message to them is one that we are sensitive to where they're at, what their knowledge is, and then we try to meet them on that level rather than in some necessarily like a canned presentation. As far as some people that we come across are well acquainted with the Bible, with the New Testament, with what the gospel is, and maybe they've drifted, maybe their theology we have differences about. That's a person that you can, there's a certain level of message that you can have with them, a certain level of meeting with them. There's people that are out there that have no religious exposure, very limited Bible knowledge. Obviously, meeting with them and talking to them is a very different. It is a very different message. So, and I think we should take that as an encouragement here, that as from Paul's example of meeting people where they're at. So he goes from. It's interesting that he's not, for once. It notes him leaving Athens on his own accord. There's no notation here that he is being that there is that there's a mob or there's any sort of dangerous activity there that's leading him to leave. No, he was according to this. He just decided to move on. How long was he in Athens? We don't really know. From his journey to Athens, it really wasn't part of his plan to go to Athens. He just had to get out of Berea, and then there was him and Silas and some of the others. They kind of got scattered. They said, we're going to gather together in Athens. So they get together in Athens, but then.
He converted Dionysius into Maris. So Dionysius was an important person in the city. He was a member of the Arapagites and whatever, which were important people. So that indicates that Paul had reached members of society, that held prominent members of society in addition to other members of the society. Maybe, and Athens was pretty much an open idea city. Right. For those two reasons, maybe why there were no repercussions like they were in the other, like in Thessalonica, where they chased him out, that type of thing. In Athens, for those two reasons, a prominent member of society was converted, and the city was known for open idea sharing.
I agree completely with that. Thank you for stopping to point those out. I was kind of get to your point too on that. That part of, and you're exactly right. It mentions the people that there's prominent members of society that are converted, and this is and we're about to see kind of the same idea in Corinth, but we'll I don't know if we'll get there today or next week. The same concept in Corinth, but yes, Athens there's pros and cons. I mean, this is a place that was just completely full of idolatry, completely full of pagan worship. But at the same time, they were open to new ideas, and it was a place. It was kind of a crossroads of knowledge and information. So yes, a group of Jews or a group of anybody trying to raise a furor about people with different ideas is probably not going to get any traction in Athens. So Corinth, they go on to Corinth, and if you could zoom in on that map a little bit on Corinth, because I want to show what's something noteworthy about the geography of Corinth. That's good. Corinth is there. That's an isthmus. So you got water on one side and water on the other. And at this time, traveling over the land is far, far more expensive and difficult than travel by sea. And the shorter the sea distance that you could have, the better. Well, Corinth basically is on a narrow isthmus between the Aegean Sea and the Adriatic on the other side. And it basically has two ports. And at this time, Corinth is a more important city commercially, than Athens is. Athens is, as we discussed, a great center of knowledge, of learning, of philosophy, and it's got a rich history, and it's got all these monuments all over the place. But as far as the city of the kind of importance of the time, Corinth was more important, and a big reason was because of its location. It has water access and going in two directions. So this is a very important city. We don't, now, we associate, we still know of Athens now. We're still aware of Athens now. Corinth, we really don't think about much now, apart from the fact that Paul was there and the time he was there, and then the letters he wrote to them. But Corinth was from a commercial standpoint, from an economic standpoint, was a much more important city than Athens was at that time. So they leave Athens of their own accord, finally, and go to Corinth. And let's get started in chapter 18. Well, I guess before we go forward, any closing comments about Athens, Paul's time in Athens, before we move forward?
So we don't really know the status of any sort of church presence there during that time.
Based on the fact that they named several people here that are prominent, I think it's safe to assume that there is a church that is established. And now we don't have the record of him writing letters to the church in Athens. So I'm not sure how much detail we have of the nature of the church or anything like that. But yes, I think pretty much everywhere he went, he left the church. He left a group of believers. So, excuse me. All right, Acts 18. Let's start at the beginning. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he went to see them. And because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for they were tent makers by trade. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and tried to persuade Jews and Greeks. Excuse me. So he gets to Corinth, and he meets, and we find out he's got a trade. He's well educated as Pharisee, but he's also got a skill that he's been trained to do, and that's a tent maker. And he meets a couple people that were Jews that were living in Rome, who were also tent makers, and he basically goes into business with them or works with them in making tents. Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. So they're basically, I guess for lack of a better term, refugees from Rome. They're settling there. What's the problem with Jews? Why did Claudius want them to leave?
Trouble.
We don't need to overthink this.
Within the Roman government.
And we're about to see that play out again. And I'm not saying that the Jews that whatever happened was completely that all the Jews that were affected were guilty in any sense, because that's obviously not the case.
Yeah, they didn't, anybody stirring up trouble within their, power struggle. It's a power struggle. They were the dominant, authorities within that region.
That's right. The Jews have a reputation of being kind of apart, our God, and some of that we can, as looking back from today, some of that we can appreciate because they believed that they were worshiping a single God, and they disapproved of idol worship. So we can sympathize with that, but in many ways they were separate. There was a separate community. So if there was a problem, and I'll get you just a second. So if there were stresses, if there was a civil disorder, they were an easy target, and sometimes they were justified target, and sometimes they were not justified, but they were so occasionally there would be we get out.
Yeah, this timeline is around 58, 59, 60 in that time.
Late 50s.
So the Jewish nation and Rome are building toward the destruction of Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
10 years. In history, most things don't occur overnight.
Correct.
So this is probably part of the ongoing sedition in Jerusalem, in Israel. And the Romans are trying to figure out how to alleviate that, manage it, that type of thing.
Right.
So getting them moved out of there, don't believe, is probably part of that solution that necessarily work.
Right.
There's also a good chance that words get around that there's just new conflict that's going on. Everywhere they're going,
The Jews, there's problems.
just getting riled up.
That's right.
Just like you said as well, the Romans like peace.
Right.
And they'll manage it.
Right.
However they do. It's in the actual edict for them to leave is actually an extra biblical source in AD 49.
So then this would have happened before. Well, I guess it happened prior to Paul's arrival there. I believe this is 51 and 52. Your point still is valid, but
It takes a long time for things to boil over.
yes. So Paul gets there, and we'll kind of mention it later, but I think it's worth pointing out now. Paul's stay in Corinth was about a year and a half. It doesn't say a lot of these places where he went. It implies that he wasn't there very long, maybe weeks. But he stayed in Corinth for a while. There's other places he's going to stay a while too, but he stayed in Corinth for a year and a half. So this was not just kind of a visiting type scenario. He basically stayed there, lived there, worked there. Had he interacted with the Jews, he interacted with Gentiles, he had commercial activity, he was working his trade. So he was, living in Corinth, and not just kind of, just proselytizing there. So verse 5, when Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was occupied with the word, testifying to the Jews that Christ was Jesus. So they joined him And when they opposed and reviled him, he shook out his garments and said to them, your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles. And he left there and went to the house of a man named Titus Justus, a worshiper of God. His house was next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord together with his entire household, and many of the Corinthians, hearing Paul, believed and were baptized. Okay, we'll stop there. So he's living there. And we get a couple things with the Jews, and I'm not sure that this narrative may some of the sequence may some of the things that are kind of interwoven in, if we read it like this happened, this happened, this happened. The Jews became incensed with him, or many of the Jews became incensed with him to the point where he was done with them. This wasn't an ongoing theological discussion, open minds. These were people that opposed him, and he acknowledged that. But think about this. I mean, verses 7 and 8 tells a lot. So it says he stayed in a house of a man named Titius Justus, a worshiper of God, who lived next door to the synagogue. So he was staying next door to the synagogue. The ruler of the synagogue was converted. So one can imagine that the Jews that were not converted were fairly incensed by this, because not only was he was converting, that they disagreed with him, and they think he is that he is an apostate or a heretic, but the leader he converted, and he's living right next door to the synagogue. So they're seeing him all the time. They're going back and forth to the synagogue, and they're walking right back where he's living. So we see this is brewing. Okay, we've seen this story before, right? So we know where this is going, right? Verse 9. So we know the Jews are angry with him, and we know what's happened in previous locations where the Jews have gotten angry with him. He's been beaten. He's been run out of town. He's been basically beaten to where they thought he was dead. He's been imprisoned. So verse 9, and the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision, do not be afraid, but go on speaking and do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in this city who are my people. And then the next says that he stayed 1 year and 6 months teaching the word of God. So we know what's happened in the past, and we don't know what prompted this message from God. Maybe the heat's getting higher. Maybe he sees what directions the Jews are going, and he knows. And maybe Paul is weary. Maybe Paul is having, he's human. I mean, we read all these stories, and it's incredible the amount of the faithfulness that he has despite the trials that he goes through. But one wonders if that he had a moment where he's thinking, here we go again. Here we go again. But he gets a message saying, you're safe here. You're not going to be harmed. And then it says that he lived there 1 year and 6 months. So he did stay there. So God says, stay, you're safe here, continue to preach the word, and you will not be harmed, because as he's described, I have many in this city who are my people. So,
Interpret that meaning.
that's a good question.
Are they converted already, or are they the Jewish people who is he referring to?
Let's read the next section and get some interpretation on that, because I don't think the answer. I think the answer is I don't think the answer is clear to that question. My opinion. All right. So here's verse 12. When Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, so Achaia is the district, the Roman province where Corinth is, and when it says the way this verbiage is kind of implies that he's new. He became proconsul, and then here the Jews come. The Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him before the tribunal, saying, "This man is persuading people to worship God contrary to the law." So they're saying that we have a law, and this man is basically teaching people astray from the law. Now, one thing that the Roman government would do, which is kind of a little different than we would, which we have that we think of in our society, is they would allow different groups some latitude into some criminal civil authority based on their religious beliefs. So you have a cluster of people in this area, and you just kind of, Romans aren't interested in micromanaging as long as things are in order. So if you have these laws and customs in this area, then that's fine. Then you just continue to obey, and we will support you in keeping those customs in place.
The problem's come about because it had such a diverse population in Corinth. And when I say that, various ethnical groups of people there, it was much harder for Romans to control that many different segments of the population. So they really had it stirred up. And I wonder why Paul went from Berea down the coastline by ship around to Athens. And Athens seems like to me was a spinoff of Corinth. Because a lot of it's very much similar to the population.
It is similar. I think that probably at the time, from our perspective, yes, probably at the time, the people of Athens would probably object to you're saying that Corinth and Athens were similar, and the Corinthians might also say the same thing.
Corinth was much larger than Athens.
Right.
Because it was a shipping world, and that's what made it so popular, is anything went that you could imagine in Rome.
And you can read the book, the letters to the Corinthians, and you know that this is not a place of high moral standards.
In other words, what we're saying is, if you're going to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, the cherry is much riper for the picture in Corinth than it is in Athens.
And
The population is so diverse.
right. And what would support what you're saying is the fact that Paul did his thing in Athens and moved on, but he went to Corinth and he stayed. So you're right. What we have in Corinth is a very diverse, as a major port, is a very diverse community there, with people with a lot of different beliefs, and as I was saying, there's a lot of civil, legal matters. The Romans aren't interested in micromanaging and getting involved in every aspect of people's lives. If there's a local custom, then continue on with that custom. Where the Romans, and what we've seen in these previous places where this happened, what has been the dynamic? They go to the Romans, to the civil authorities, and say, they kind of gin up a disturbance, a mob, and then they say, look, it's their fault. They came to town, and now we've got this civil unrest. So, and then they would say that these people are coming and they're teaching contrary to what the laws are, our customs that are contrary, and basically just troublemakers coming here. So that's essentially what they say here. But it's a little bit different here than in other places. So back up to 13, saying that this man is persuading people to worship God contrary to the law. But when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, if it were a matter of wrongdoing or vicious crime, O Jews, I would have reason to accept your complaint. But since it is matters of questions about words and names and your own law, see to it yourselves. I refuse to be a judge of these things. So why is this response different than the responses that he got in these six? Well, the answer is we're about to have the answer. This dynamic happened before, and basically the Roman authorities were fairly harsh with Paul. We've got a mob, we got civil unrest, and all signs point to this man being behind it, or the instigator or the cause of this. So we need to get him in jail. We need to get him out of town. That type of thing does not happen here. Let's read a little bit further. So he just says, look, this is your own internal issue. And I'm not here to sort out internal Jewish religious disputes or controversies. And he drove them from the tribunal, and they all seized Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him in front of the tribunal. But Gallio paid no attention to any of this. So what happened? Well, it backfired. The whole thing backfired. So now we can kind of try to draw some lines here. You know, we have Jews here that were recently exiled from we recently many of the Jews there we know were exiled from Rome. So everybody knows what's going on, that the Jews are kind of in disfavor, and here they get stirred up about some issues with Paul, and the proconsul says, I'm not dealing with this. And then when he says, and basically, get out of here. And then they pushed them all out, and the ruler of the synagogue, the one that was bringing these charges, was basically beat up in a public manner, and the Romans did nothing to stop it. So the mood, I guess for lack of a better term, has changed. And and at least here at this time, they were not interested in the Jews getting upset and catering to the Jews' concerns.
Yeah, to him, that's an internal issue between you guys and your own religion. It's not, he said, if it was anything to do with our crime, then yeah, I'd get involved, but this is just words between you guys.
Right.
And that's where I'm not getting involved.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a different ruler? Is that the same guy?
It was a year and a half later,
That's a year and a half later, so it's a different ruler.
probably something.
The ruler,
Is it-
Crispus was
Christmas was the one that was converted.
He was not the one that brought forth the
for this. So there would have to be a different ruler of the synagogue.
So you're right. But more, I mean,
there's a lot more than that, because, okay, this man is essentially a politician. And he, even though he's new there, he kind of knows, he probably is getting some information about the mood and the sense of the people that live there and the sense of kind of the whole, the temperature of the situation. And what he was not, nothing says here that suggests that this man is a Christian or that he was a follower or even that he was a commendable human being. There's nothing that says that here. He may have been, but I believe it would have said something about him, obviously, if he was a believer. But he didn't just say, no, we're not discussing that here. He kicked him out, and then they got beat up, and they did nothing to stop it. So there's a point being made here that the Jews we're not having this here. We're not having this drama here. We're not having this, turning your internal religious disputes into a civil matter, turning it into riots, turning it into any of that. That's not happening here. That's what I'm gathering here. So we get from that, and some of the things I read, that because of the way the Jews had conducted themselves, it really put the Christians in favor. Because they became sympathetic with seeing as victims, as seeing as in more of a positive light than had the Jews done nothing.
I'm just, as a separate, I don't know if you're going to go here or not, but Gallia, the proconsul.
Yeah.
Well, there's a letter from Claudius that they had found, an inscription. It's from a letter from that, who appointed Gallia to be the proconsul in Achaia from AD 51 to AD 52. So this incident is also a significant marker in the life of Paul, anchoring down exactly when this event took place and historically. Just, I don't know if you were going to get to that.
Yeah, it is.
It's very, so this actually, Mike asked the question earlier, and I don't know, I don't know that we know the answer to this question when it says when God tells Paul, my people, I have people there, you have no reason to be afraid. Was he talking about believers that were in position of authority that prevented this thing from happening? Or was he talking more broadly saying, look, I know the situation, I know who's who, I know the kind of the lay of the land here, God knows, and the people that are in charge now are not people that are going to harm you. So I don't know. I'm not sure. I think the answer is all the above. I think that when he's talked about his people there, I think that there's a growing group of believers there. There's a growing community there. But this whole thing suggests that the Christian believers had a certain degree of goodwill in the community there, and the Jews did not. And the reaction to the Jews trying to manufacture some civil problem was violent from the local community. So more comments about this. Skip back, something I kind of jumped over and didn't really talk about. Verse 6. And this is talking about him, meeting in the synagogue and sharing the word with the Jews, and they oppressed and reviled him. And when they oppressed and reviled him, he shook out his garments and said to them, your blood be on your own heads, I am innocent. What what is the significance of that? Or what's the takeaway from us? I'm not saying we should use that terminology, but there's a message there for us.
They don't want to hear it.
That's exactly right.
Well, the message to me was that Paul was going to the Gentiles, and that's the him he was supposed to be going to preach the gospel.
But
He was preaching it to all, but you're right. He was going to go.
They were just pushing. Those are the same people that were following Paul all the way to Berea and on down the coastline through Athens over into Corinth. They were just about the followers that were angry because of Paul preaching the gospel.
yeah, we don't know.
I don't know if these that he's talking about here are the Jews that were there, that lived there, or if these were Jews that followed them down. We don't know, but your point's right. But I think what the main message for us is, in the example that Paul gives, is that if someone's not receptive, then move on. And it's tough when, just a second, it is tough when in so many cases, the person that's not receptive is someone that's near and dear to us. And I'm not saying we should use this terminology here, but there's a time to just back away and look in different directions, and maybe conditions will be right at another point in time. Jim?
Again, he goes to the Jews, and he's first. And
Yes.
then he's rejected. Here, he uses some really strong language.
He
Your
does.
blood is on your hands. In other words, if God punishes you, that's on you. I'm trying my best. To me, that's a difference in the other places. He was really strong
Right.
language here
And
to indicate to them, this is against God's will.
Right.
You're making your choice, and this is on you.
yeah,
What I notice here is, and that cuts both directions though, because describing them as in the translation I have, opposing and reviling him. So opposing and reviling someone, that's more than disagreement. That's more than, we have a theological disagreement and we're still engaging with each other to try to seek to understand, try to persuade each other of the error of our ways. It had gotten, that's not where they were at anymore. They were beyond that, and they were opposing him and they were reviling him. And his response was this, this is your guilt is on you, and and shaking out his clothes and basically, I'm done with you. I'm not wasting my time with you anymore. And again, this, as for us, the message here, as Ms. Sharon points out, is not to say that we need to. if the time isn't right, we say your guilt is on you or whatever. But we just need to move on, and look, and there's people out there that are searching, and we should concentrate our efforts where they might bear fruit.
Well, you just made me think of something. So appreciate that. Sometimes we feel like we should go preach the word no matter what, and always strive to do that. But this indicates that there is a point where that bears no fruit.
that's right.
And you need to move on. And that's a difficult place to judge. I think in our society, in our modern view, we try to keep pushing that, or we're kind of taught that, and if we don't, then we're failing.
Yeah,
Failure, like you said earlier, it's both ways. It can be a failure on our part to not preach, but a lot of times it's failure on their part to not listen.
well,
And we have, the parable that Jesus had when he's talking to his followers about the seed, and the some seed falls on rocky ground, and it might not grow, or it might grow really fast but not take. And so what is the message from that parable? What is our job? Is our job to make sure that it grows? Our job is to cast the seed.
Now he that planteth and he that waters are one, and every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labor. So we're blessed on the labor. We don't have any, God gives the increase, we don't need to have any power. We want the opportunity given us. Give the opportunity, and we learn to be diligent. We can't be forceful. But sometimes you want people to wait forever. And when they talk about the Church of Christ, that becomes what they got heard many times. But what hurts us when we try to evangelize is saying that we have some power. Because we bring the word, and the words and the power, and when they don't accept, that's what they're rejecting. And so as you get seeds in, you realize they more than the whole world. You could plant a seed, somebody might come behind you and be able to do it with you. For instance, one sister said studied with a woman in California for 10 years. And we went to a lecture in that year. And I converted the woman, I'd only seen her a couple of times. But she was carrying around her Bible correspondence and had sent her. She was an insurance investor, so she traveled. So she did all the work, but then it just happened that I was there, and she did all the work.
When the time was right.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly right.
There's a lot here. It's interesting. The different places that he goes, the different reactions that he gets, and that kind of the mood of places differs from place to place, but wherever he goes, he's spreading the word. And what I'm going to do next week is a little bit different, and I did this earlier. It is, earlier on this trip he was in Thessalonica, and it is believed that the two letters to the Thessalonians were written during this time frame when he was in Corinth. So what I'm going to do next week is we're not going to do a thorough study of Thessalonians, but we are going to do a kind of an overview of those two letters, see at this moment in time what had happened to the church in Thessalonica, what they needed, and what these letters were about, so we can know what Paul was up to at this time in Corinth besides spreading the word. So thank you all for being here, and for those that are online, we'll be back on in about 10 minutes.